March 15, 2024. Amboseli National Park, Kenya. Maggie Chen had been running from her past for 15 years. The baby elephant that walked out of the acacia trees at dawn carried the proof that her past had found her. The calf approached slowly, trunk extended, wearing a radio collar that hadn't been used since 2009. Maggie's hands trembled as she read the frequency, 144.675. Dr. James Nakamura's frequency, the frequency of a dead man. Inside the collar's data chip was something that made her blood freeze. GPS coordinates to 17 mass graves scattered across 3 countries. Graves that didn't exist 15 years ago. Someone had been watching. Someone had been waiting. And the message carved into the collar's leather strap was written in James's handwriting. The silence ends tonight, Maggie. Choose your side. The baby elephant that saved her career was about to destroy her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maggie's radio crackled to life, shattering the morning silence. Base to Ranger Chen. We've got poachers moving northwest toward your sector, armed and dangerous. Do not engage. She stared at the baby elephant, her mind racing. The timing wasn't coincidence. Nothing in this business ever was. The calf took another step forward, its dark eyes fixed on hers with an intelligence that made her skin crawl. Elephants were smart, but this felt different, calculated. Like it was following instructions. Copy that base, she whispered into her radio, never breaking eye contact with the animal. How many? 3 vehicles. Heavy artillery. ETA 15 minutes to your position. 15 minutes. Maggie's throat went dry as she processed what was happening. James, if he was really alive, wasn't just sending her a message, he was forcing her hand. The poachers weren't coming for random elephants, they were coming for this one, for the evidence it carried. She had 2 choices, run and let them take the collar, destroying the only proof of the mass graves, or stand and fight with nothing but a tranquilizer gun against military-grade weapons. The baby elephant trumpeted softly, a sound that seemed almost mocking in the morning air. Its trunk touched her leg, leaving a smear of red mud, or what she hoped was mud, on her khaki pants. Maggie knelt beside the calf, her fingers working frantically at the collar's clasp. The leather was weathered but strong, designed to last years in the harsh African sun. As she struggled with the mechanism, she caught sight of something else that made her stomach lurch. Carved into the collar's underside, hidden from casual view, were 17 sets of coordinates. But underneath those, in fresher scratches, was a date, today's date. And below that, coordinates she recognized with sickening clarity, the exact location where she now stood. Jesus Christ, James, she breathed. What did you become? The distant rumble of engines cut through her shock. They were coming faster than Base had estimated. She could see dust clouds rising through the acacia trees, moving with the precision of a military convoy. The collar finally gave way, and Maggie clutched it to her chest as the baby elephant stepped back. For a moment, she thought it might run back into the trees. Instead, it sat down heavily in the red dirt, as if its job was done. That's when she saw the dart. A small tranquilizer dart protruded from the calf's hindquarters, nearly invisible against its gray skin. Fresh, recent. Someone had drugged this elephant and sent it to her like a guided missile. The engines were closer now. Through the trees, she could make out the angular shapes of military-style vehicles. Not the typical poacher setup of battered pickup trucks and rusty AK-47s. This was professional, well-funded, corporate. Maggie's mind flashed back to that night 15 years ago when she'd made the decision that destroyed everything. She'd found James in their research tent at 2 a.m., uploading elephant tracking data to an encrypted server. When she'd confronted him, he'd broken down, admitted to selling location data to ivory buyers. But he'd sworn it was only to fund their conservation work, that he was saving 10 elephants for every one they lost. She'd believed him, God help her, she'd believed him and helped cover it up. Now she understood the truth. There had been no saving 10 for 1. There had only been the killing, systematic and endless, funded by her silence and protected by her complicity. The first vehicle broke through the tree line, a black military Humvee with tinted windows. It stopped 50 meters away, engine idling like a predator testing the air. Maggie stood slowly, the collar hidden behind her back. The baby elephant hadn't moved, its eyes now glassy from whatever drug they'd used. She wondered if it would survive what was coming. She wondered if any of them would. The Humvee's passenger door opened, and a figure emerged that made her heart stop. James Nakamura looked exactly the same as he had 15 years ago, except for the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. He wore expensive safari gear and carried himself with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. "Hello, Maggie." His voice carried across the distance between them, warm and familiar, as if they were meeting for coffee instead of a confrontation that would determine whether she lived to see sunset. She keyed her radio one last time, knowing it was probably futile. "Base, this is Chen. I need immediate backup at grid reference." James raised his hand, and she heard the distinctive crack of a sniper rifle. Her radio exploded in a shower of plastic and sparks. Now, James called out, his tone almost playful. "Let's not involve the authorities just yet. We have so much catching up to do." The baby elephant gave one last weak trumpet and collapsed onto its side. Maggie realized she was about to join it. Maggie's fingers tightened around the collar behind her back as James walked closer, his boots crunching on the dry earth with the measured pace of a man who owned time itself. The morning sun caught the scar on his face, turning it silver against his weathered skin, and she found herself remembering the last time she'd seen him whole. Standing in their research tent with elephant blood still under his fingernails from the necropsy they'd performed that day. Back then, she'd thought the blood meant the same thing to both of them. Loss, dedication, the price of protecting something beautiful in an ugly world. Now she wondered if James had been calculating market value per pound, even as they'd worked to save the matriarch's calf. "You look good, Maggie," James said, stopping 20 feet away. Close enough that she could see the new lines around his eyes, the expensive watch on his wrist, the way his safari shirt was tailored to accommodate what looked like body armor underneath. "Ranger life suits you." The baby elephant's breathing was shallow but steady. Maggie forced herself not to look down at it, not to show James how much the drugged calf's condition affected her. He'd always been able to read her emotions like weather patterns, and that skill had apparently only sharpened during his 15 years in the shadows. "I thought you were dead," she said, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. The collar's weight pressed against her spine, a physical reminder of the coordinates carved into its leather. 17 sites where elephants had died because of data she'd helped him steal. James smiled, the same boyish grin that had once made her believe they were partners in something noble. "I was, in a way. The James you knew died the night you chose silence over justice. This version of me was born from that choice." A second vehicle emerged from the tree line, then a third. Professional, coordinated. Men with military bearing climbed out, their weapons held with casual competence. Maggie recognized the type from her early veterinary days working conflict zones. Mercenaries who'd found new purpose in Africa's resource wars. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd come to Kenya originally to escape violence, drawn by the promise of protecting something innocent and wild. After medical school and a brief, disastrous marriage to another surgeon, she'd burned out on human medicine and found herself volunteering with wildlife conservation groups. The elephants had saved her sanity, given her purpose. She'd met James at a research station near Tsavo, both of them young and idealistic, working 18-hour days to collar and track elephant families displaced by drought. For 3 years, they'd been the perfect team. She provided the medical expertise, he handled the data analysis and GPS tracking. They'd published papers, secured grants, built something that felt like it mattered. The night she'd found him selling tracking data, she'd faced a choice that seemed impossible: destroy the career of the only person who understood her work, or trust that his intentions were somehow pure despite his methods. She'd chosen trust, helped him cover his tracks, convinced herself that their research was too important to sacrifice over what he'd sworn was a temporary ethical compromise. "Do you know what I've built since then?" James asked, his voice carrying the pride of a father describing his children. "A network spanning 6 countries, sustainable harvesting operations that process over 2 tons of ivory annually, scientific precision applied to resource extraction." Maggie's stomach lurched. "That's not science, James. That's industrial murder." "Is it?" He tilted his head, genuinely curious. "We use your tracking protocols, GPS data, behavioral analysis, population density models, all the research we developed together. We've simply optimized it for different outcomes." The sun was climbing higher, and the morning's cool air was already giving way to the day's heat. Sweat collected between Maggie's shoulder blades, making the collar's leather backing stick to her shirt. She thought about the coordinates hidden against her spine, wondered how many families of elephants had gathered at waterholes or migration routes, trusting in patterns that had kept them safe for centuries, only to find death waiting with scientific precision. "The calf," she said, nodding toward the sedated elephant. "Why involve it?" James crouched down, his hand hovering over the baby's flank but not quite touching. "Because you needed to understand the scope. 17 sites, Maggie. All of them using tracking data derived from our original research. All of them profitable because of the foundation we built together." He stood, brushing dust from his knees. "But that's just the beginning. I have something much larger in mind now, something that requires your particular expertise. I'll never help you." "Oh, but you will." James checked his expensive watch. "Because in 8 hours, one of my teams will visit the Kimana Primary School where you volunteer on weekends. 43 children, ages 6 to 12. Beautiful kids, Maggie. Smart. Full of potential." The world tilted. Maggie felt the collar slip in her sweating grip, caught it just before it fell. "You bastard. I'm a businessman. And you, my dear old friend, are about to become my business partner once again." The collar's leather cut into Maggie's palm as her grip tightened involuntarily. 43 children. He'd counted them. Of course he had. James had always been methodical, even when they were cataloging elephant calves in the wild. The same precision that had once made him brilliant at tracking migration patterns now made him terrifying at tracking innocence. "You're monitoring the school," she said, the words tasting like ash. It wasn't a question. James wouldn't make threats he couldn't execute. Monitoring seemed such a clinical term. James adjusted his watch again, and Maggie noticed it wasn't just expensive. It was a tactical model with GPS and encrypted communication capabilities. "I prefer to think of it as expanding our research methodology. Children, like elephants, follow predictable patterns. School starts at 8, lunch break at noon. They play in the courtyard until 3:30. The baby elephant stirred slightly, one ear twitching against a fly. Maggie forced herself to focus on that small movement, using it to anchor herself against the rising panic. She'd learned this technique during her surgical residency. Find something concrete to focus on when the world threatened to spin away from you. But this wasn't an emergency room where she could control variables and outcomes. This was James's game, played by rules she was only beginning to understand. "What do you want?" The question came out smaller than she'd intended, and she hated how it sounded like surrender. James reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew something that made Maggie's blood freeze. A photograph. Even from 20 feet away, she could make out the faces of children in school uniforms, their gap-toothed smiles bright against the red dust of the schoolyard. At the center of the group stood a familiar figure, herself from last weekend's reading session. "I want what I've always wanted, Maggie. Partnership. You were the best field veterinarian I ever worked with, and these 17 sites are just the beginning." He held up the photograph like a conductor preparing to begin a symphony. "I'm planning something that will revolutionize wildlife management across East Africa, but it requires someone who understands elephant behavior on an intimate level." "You mean slaughter?" "I mean optimization." James's voice hardened, losing its casual warmth. "Do you know what the black market price for ivory has reached in the past year? $1,200 per kilogram. A single adult elephant yields approximately 40 kilograms. We're looking at nearly $50,000 per animal, and that's just the ivory." Maggie's mind reeled. The numbers were astronomical, but what chilled her was the way James spoke about them. Not as shocking prices that proved how wrong this all was, but as business metrics that justified scaling up. "There are also secondary markets," he continued. "Elephant hide for traditional medicine, ground bone for supplements, even the meat has value in certain regions. My operation has achieved vertical integration that maximizes profit per animal while minimizing waste." The photograph trembled in his hand. Whether from a breeze or his own excitement, Maggie couldn't tell. But she could see something else now. More vehicles moving through the trees in the distance. Not his people. The dust patterns were wrong, too chaotic. "My teams have already identified over 300 elephants in this region, using updated versions of our original tracking algorithms," James said. "But the logistics of processing that many animals requires precise coordination, migration timing, family group dynamics, optimal harvesting locations, all areas where your expertise would prove invaluable." Maggie shifted slightly, trying to get a better view of the approaching vehicles without alerting James. The movement sent fresh sweat trickling down her back, and she felt something crinkle against her skin. Not just the collar's leather, there was paper tucked into the inner band. And if I refuse? James lowered the photograph, and for a moment, his expression softened into something that almost resembled regret. Then the children become case studies in collateral damage, but I'd prefer not to waste their potential. Some of them are quite bright, especially that little girl who always sits in the front row during your reading sessions. Kezzy, isn't it? 7 years old, wants to be a veterinarian like you? The world went white around the edges. Maggie had helped Kezzy with her letters just 5 days ago, watched her carefully sound out words from a picture book about baby animals. The child's earnest concentration, her small hand gripping a pencil worn down to a stub, her shy smile when she successfully read an entire sentence. James had turned even those precious memories into weapons. "You have until sunset," James said, his voice returning to businesslike efficiency. 6 o'clock. My people will collect you at the ranger station and we'll discuss the details of our new partnership. Refuse, and by tomorrow morning, you'll have 43 new reasons to reconsider. He turned to walk back toward his vehicles, then paused. "Oh, and Maggie, I know you found the collar. Consider it a resume, evidence of what I've accomplished with our research. But there's something else inside that leather band, something that proves our partnership was always more permanent than either of us realized." Maggie stood frozen until the rumble of James's convoy faded into the distance, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. The baby elephant lay motionless in the red dirt, its breathing so shallow she had to kneel close to confirm it was still alive. The tranquilizer dart protruded obscenely from its flank, a violation that felt personal, deliberate. Her hands shook as she finally examined what James had mentioned. The paper tucked inside the collar's band was actually 2 documents, both wrapped in waterproof plastic. The first was a copy of their original research grant application from 15 years ago, signed by both of them in faded blue ink. Seeing her younger self's signature, confident, idealistic, made her stomach clench. The second document stopped her cold, a bank account statement dated 3 months after James's supposed death, showing deposits totaling over $2 million. The account holder's name was listed as Dr. Margaret Chen. No. The word escaped her lips as a whisper. She'd never seen this account, never authorized any deposits, but there was her social security number, her passport details, even a signature that looked disturbingly like her own. James had been building a paper trail for 15 years, creating evidence that she'd been his willing partner all along. If anyone investigated, they'd find documentation showing she'd profited from every elephant death, every ton of ivory sold. The cover-up she'd helped orchestrate had become her own noose. The radio crackled on her belt, the backup unit she always carried. "Chen, come in. This is Base." Maggie fumbled for the device, her fingers still trembling. "This is Chen. We've got reports of military vehicles in your sector. Everything okay out there?" She stared at the forged bank statement, thinking about Kessie's gap-toothed smile, about 43 children who had no idea they'd become pawns in a game that started with her silence. Negative, false alarm, just tourists with fancy gear. The lie came easily, which terrified her. Even now, faced with proof of James's manipulation, her first instinct was to protect the cover-up. 15 years of carrying this secret had trained her to lie reflexively, to choose isolation over accountability. "Copy that. You sound shaken. Want us to send someone out?" "No." The word came out too sharp. She forced her voice to soften. "No, I'm fine. Just a long morning. Chin out." She clipped the radio back to her belt, knowing she'd just made another choice that would haunt her. But what alternative did she have? Tell Base that her former research partner, supposedly dead for 15 years, was now running the largest poaching operation in East Africa? That she'd been complicit from the beginning? That 43 children were about to die because of decisions she'd made when she was young and stupid and thought she could control the consequences of compromise? The baby elephant stirred, lifting its head slightly. Its eyes were clearer now, the sedative wearing off. Maggie reached out instinctively to check its pulse, her veterinary training overriding everything else. The heartbeat was strong and steady under her palm. "What did they do to you, sweetheart?" she whispered. "How long have they been using you?" As if in response, the calf struggled to its feet, swaying slightly. It looked at her with ancient eyes, then turned and began walking slowly back toward the tree line. Not fleeing, walking, purposeful, as if it had somewhere to be. Maggie stood to follow, then stopped. James's words echoed in her memory, something that proves our partnership was always more permanent than either of us realized. The forged documents were damning, but they weren't proof of permanence. They were proof of preparation. James had spent 15 years building a case against her, yes, but why reveal it now? What had changed? She looked at the collar again, really examining it this time. The coordinates carved into the leather weren't random. They formed a pattern. 17 sites arranged in a rough circle around. Her stomach dropped as she recognized the center point, the children's school. James hadn't just counted the students. He'd been planning this convergence for months, maybe years. The 17 mass graves weren't just evidence of his success. They were a ritual circle, with the school at its heart. The baby elephant paused at the tree line, looking back at her, waiting. Against every rational instinct, Maggie found herself following. The calf moved with surprising speed for something recently sedated, leading her deeper into the acacia forest. Within minutes, she could no longer see the clearing where James had confronted her. That's when she heard the voices. Low, urgent conversation in a mixture of English and Swahili. The baby elephant stopped beside a massive termite mound, partially hidden behind its bulk. Maggie crept closer, her ranger training keeping her footsteps silent on the forest floor. "Told you, the woman cannot be trusted," someone was saying. "She's too emotional, too attached to the animals." "James disagrees," came the reply. "He says she's the key to everything." Maggie pressed herself against the termite mound, her heart racing. James's people, discussing her fate while she was supposed to be safely back at the ranger station, agonizing over his ultimatum. The baby elephant looked at her with those ancient eyes, and she realized the truth. She'd been herded here deliberately. The calf wasn't seeking help. It was delivering her exactly where James wanted her to be. The voices grew clearer as Maggie pressed herself deeper against the termite mound's rough surface. 3 men, maybe 4. Their conversation punctuated by the metallic click of weapons being checked and rechecked. "Surveillance confirms she hasn't contacted anyone," a voice said in accented English. "Phone records clean. Radio chatter routine." "Of course they are," came the bitter reply. 15 years of practice keeping secrets. James always said she was a natural at covering tracks. The words hit Maggie like physical blows. They'd been watching her communications, probably for weeks. Every call to her sister in California, every mundane radio check with the ranger station, every moment she'd thought was private, all of it monitored, cataloged, used to build their operational picture. But it was the familiarity in their voices that made her blood freeze. They spoke about her habits, her routines, with the casual intimacy of people who'd been studying her for a very long time. What about the other rangers? Isolated. Chen works alone most shifts, prefers the remote sectors. Psychological profile suggests she deliberately avoids close relationships with colleagues. Psychological profile. The clinical terminology made her skin crawl. They'd reduced her to behavioral patterns and risk assessments, the same way she'd once cataloged elephant family dynamics for research papers. A new voice joined the conversation, younger, nervous. "The school timeline is tight. If she doesn't comply, she'll comply." The authority in this voice was absolute. Dr. Chen has spent 15 years running from the consequences of one night's choice. She won't let 43 children pay for her past mistakes. Maggie's breath caught. They understood her psychology better than she'd understood it herself. Every decision she'd made since that night with James, choosing isolated assignments, avoiding partnerships, dedicating herself to protection rather than research, they'd mapped it all, weaponized her own guilt against her. The baby elephant shifted beside her, its trunk touching her arm with surprising gentleness. The contact was almost comforting until she remembered what it represented. Even this innocent creature had been turned into an instrument of manipulation. "Timeline update," someone said, and she heard the rustle of papers or maps. "Teams are in position at sites 7 through 12. Harvest operations can begin within 2 hours of confirmation." Harvest operations. The euphemism made her stomach turn. They were discussing the systematic slaughter of elephant families with the same casual efficiency she'd once used to discuss vaccination schedules. What about the GPS data from the original research? Complete. Every tracking collar Chen and Hartwell deployed between 2007 and 2009 has been mapped. Some of those elephants are still alive, still following predictable migration patterns. Their offspring, too, behavioral inheritance is remarkably consistent across generations. The scope of it staggered her. James hadn't just corrupted their original research, he'd been building on it for 15 years, expanding their tracking methodologies into a comprehensive surveillance network. Every elephant family they'd studied, protected, published papers about, all of it had become raw material for an industrial killing machine. "She's coming," someone whispered urgently. Maggie's pulse spiked before she realized they weren't talking about her. Through the acacia trees, she could see dust clouds approaching, multiple vehicles moving fast. But these weren't James's people. The engine sounds were wrong, lighter, and there were too many of them for a coordinated poaching team. The men beyond the termite mound had gone silent, and she could hear the subtle sounds of weapons being readied. The baby elephant pressed closer to her, as if seeking protection, and she felt a stab of protective rage that surprised her with its intensity. A radio crackled, not hers, but one of theirs. "All teams, we have incoming. Local authorities moving fast. Could be a raid." Maggie's heart leaped. Someone had called it in. Maybe her earlier radio conversation had triggered protocols she wasn't aware of, or maybe James's convoy had been spotted by other rangers. Either way, help was coming, but as the vehicles drew closer, she caught fragments of the radio chatter that made her blood freeze. Negative on backup, Hartwell wants them taken alive if possible. Chen is priority one for extraction, not a rescue, another trap. The baby elephant looked up at her with those impossibly ancient eyes, and she realized James had planned for this contingency too. He'd positioned his people here knowing she'd follow the calf, knowing her protective instincts would override her survival instincts. Now the approaching vehicles, disguised as a rescue, would complete her capture. The forged documents in the collar suddenly made terrible sense. James didn't just want her cooperation, he wanted her complete destruction. The bank statements, the fabricated partnership records, they weren't just leverage. They were preparation for a final revelation that would destroy everything she'd tried to rebuild after their partnership ended. She pressed her face against the termite mound's rough surface, feeling 15 years of carefully constructed distance from that night collapse around her. The baby elephant's trunk touched her hand again, and she understood with devastating clarity that she'd never really escaped James's web at all. She'd just been living in the part of it he hadn't chosen to close yet. The vehicles surrounded the termite mound with military precision, engines cutting out in synchronized silence that spoke of practiced coordination. Maggie held her breath, the baby elephant's warm flank pressed against her legs as boots hit the ground in rhythmic sequence. "Secure the perimeter," came a familiar voice that made her world tilt sideways. Dr. Chen should be somewhere in this sector. Warden David Kamau, her supervisor, the man who'd hired her 8 years ago, who'd praised her dedication to remote patrol work, who'd signed off on every request for isolated assignments with what she'd interpreted as understanding of her need for solitude. "Sir, we've got visual on the target animal." "Excellent." The tracking data was accurate then. Maggie's mind reeled as pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. David's easy approval of her preference for working alone, his casual questions about her patrol routes, the way he'd always seemed genuinely interested in her wildlife observations, encouraging her to file detailed reports about elephant family movements and behavioral patterns. He hadn't been protecting her need for isolation. He'd been facilitating her surveillance. "Dr. Chen," David called out, his voice carrying the same warm authority she'd trusted for 8 years. "We know you're here. The GPS tracker in your radio has been active all morning." The radio on her belt suddenly felt like a lead weight. Not just monitored, equipped with tracking technology she'd never consented to, never even suspected. Every remote patrol, every moment she thought she was alone with the elephants she'd sworn to protect, had been choreographed by the very man she'd believed was giving her a second chance. "There's been a misunderstanding," David continued, his tone reasonable, paternal. "Dr. Hartwell explained about your meeting this morning. We're here to ensure your safety during this transition period." Transition period. The clinical euphemism made her stomach clench. They were already talking about her capitulation as a foregone conclusion, reducing her moral crisis to an administrative process. The baby elephant pressed closer, trembling now, and she realized it was responding to her terror as much as the surrounding voices. Even in its own trauma, the calf was trying to offer comfort, a gesture of pure innocence that threw the corruption around them into sharp relief. "The children at the school have been safely relocated," David said, and Maggie's breath caught. Dr. Hartwell felt it was important to demonstrate good faith. They're at a temporary facility where they'll receive excellent care while you and he finalize your research partnership. The lie was expertly crafted, designed to sound like protection while confirming the threat. The children weren't safe. They'd been moved to a more controlled environment where James could guarantee their isolation, and David was presenting this kidnapping as a benevolent gesture, proof of James's reasonable nature. "We have the forged financial documents," came another voice, Sarah Ochieng, the park's head administrator. Another betrayal that hit like a physical blow. Dr. Hartwell explained how they were fabricated to pressure you. "We're prepared to issue official statements clearing your name of any financial impropriety." Maggie almost laughed at the twisted genius of it. They were offering to protect her from evidence they'd created, painting James as her savior rather than her destroyer. Anyone investigating later would find documentation showing that Warden Kamau and Administrator Ochieng had vouched for her character, had helped expose forged evidence designed to frame her. "Your dedication to elephant conservation is exactly what Dr. Hartwell's organization needs," Sarah continued. "The funding he secured could revolutionize wildlife protection across Kenya. Imagine the lives you could save." The rhetoric was perfect, appealing to every genuine desire she'd ever expressed, reframing collaboration with poachers as the ultimate conservation victory. They'd studied her psychology so thoroughly they knew exactly which arguments would create maximum internal conflict. "Dr. Chen," David's voice hardened slightly, authority bleeding through the paternal facade. "We need to discuss this face to face, for everyone's safety." The slip revealed everything. Not her safety, everyone's safety. The children, her colleagues, anyone whose well-being could be leveraged against her conscience. David wasn't just James's informant, he was his partner, someone who'd infiltrated park management specifically to identify and recruit vulnerable employees. A new radio crackled, James's voice, transmitted to the team surrounding her. "Maggie, I know you can hear this. Your friends are trying to help you understand that cooperation isn't surrender, it's evolution. We're going to save more elephants together than you ever could alone." The final insult, James positioning himself as the conservation hero, her refusal to join him as selfish obstinacy. He'd weaponized her own values against her so completely that resistance felt like betrayal of everything she claimed to believe. But then the baby elephant lifted its head, looking directly at her with ancient eyes that held no trace of deception, and she remembered what real innocence looked like. "Actually, James," she said, keying her own radio, "there's something you never understood about elephants." Her voice carried clearly in the stillness, and she felt the circle of supposed rescuers tense around her hiding place. "They never forget a betrayal.